Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Delvecchio here, specializing in life transitions, downsizing in the senior living industry.
And I'm Corey Sirota, clinical social worker and author of Someone Died, Now What?
Corey, we've been doing this new segment on the second half called Helping Moms and Dads, and we've been getting wonderful feedback. Thank you to the listeners texting us and, I guess, commenting on our Life Unrehearsed Facebook page. We do appreciate it. It's obviously resonating with a lot of, we'll call it the sandwich generation, and even moms and dads and grandparents. So we're excited about that, and we really want to have some interesting, knowledgeable guests covering a whole range of topics that families have to cope with in the challenge of the aging process.
Speaking of interesting topics and specialists, right with this theme, we figured that given that the holidays are coming up, we know families will now be thankfully allowed to gather. And so it's probably an ideal time to have some of those important family conversations particularly with your aging parents. So given that, Matt, this is clearly an area that you are specialized in, and you're with families daily, helping them navigate the aging process and dealing with the challenging situations, I thought, why not interview you? So here we are, and let's start off with, why is it actually important to have conversations, these kinds of conversations? Why should families be having them with their aging parents?
Yeah, it is absolutely crucial that we have these important conversations, because they are usually difficult or uncomfortable topics to be talking about. So we tend to put it off.
Okay, so let's ask. So let me start with, what are some of the uncomfortable topics?
Well, one I get a lot is related to legal matters, and we've talked lately on our show the last little while on some of these important legal matters, and it's important to reinforce that. Starting with wills, it's amazing. There's different stats on it, but it's in the range of 45 to 50% of Canadians don't have wills. It's really unbelievable if you think about this. And there's different reasons. Some think they're too young, or I don't have enough money or assets. A lot of the reasons we get is they're just procrastinated. I don't want to deal with this difficult subject. I don't want to think about dying. And as a result, wills don't get done. So we encourage, just start with getting a wills. And within those wills, not only are you going to talk about where your assets are going to, but very often we try to encourage, a hot topic, Corey, is about power of attorney and protection mandates. Last week, in fact, we had a notary, and it's amazing. People think, okay, I've got a power of attorney, I'm good to go. It's important, and you could put that in your will, who you're going to sign as your POA. But what that is a temporary measure, and it's while the individual is apt, something, to help with paying bills, for example, in a financial institution. A power of attorney is very, very good. People don't realize, though, what happens if you become incapacitated. Let's say, for example, we just talked about Alzheimer's and dementia. That's quite an important reason, how you could be incapacitated, maybe major stroke or so on. And so this is where a protection mandate comes in. While you are apt, you are assigning a mandatory in the situation where you are incapacitated. That's called a protection mandate. You could put that in your will as well. So that means someone is taking over all decision-making powers for you. And I want to go back to this example of selling a house. If you have a power of attorney, you can't sell a house on behalf of your mom or dad who may be the owner of that house. You really do need a protection mandate, and it needs to have a homologation process which goes through the court. So legal matters are an important one to talk about.
That's the voice of Matt Delvecchio, Senior Transition Specialist. He's sharing some important information about some important conversations on our show, Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corey Sirota, and it's my pleasure to explore these topics with you. So what about desired care needs? Like people, you mentioned as someone's health is failing. What does that have to do? Why is that a conversation that has to happen?
Yeah, there's always assumptions being made by either mom or dad or your grandparents or by the children, the adult children. And so, for example, especially with the pandemic, we're hearing more and more, I'm staying at home. I want to stay at home as long as I possibly can, which is completely normal. We understand that. But when trying to actually make that happen, it's a little bit more difficult. It's easier said than done. So if you are planning on aging at home, try to get prepared as to what would be required. What is available out there through the CLSC that can provide some help? You could even go private if you need some home care support. Maybe you need to adapt the home. Slips and falls often happen in places like the bathroom. And can you get the grab bars around the shower or the bathtub? What is the role of family and siblings? So often I hear, maybe the daughter is living here in Montreal, is taking care of mom, and the other son or the daughter living in Toronto or New York saying, well, no, of course they're going to live at home. You got to age at home. Well, you know what? You're out of town. And of course we all love our parents, but to actually be able to do it and you're out of town, it's not really fair for that individual in town to do that. So have these discussions of aging at home. Maybe if care becomes too much or too expensive, to consider retirement living communities, senior living communities. By the way, 18% of Quebecers live in senior living communities. It's by far the most in Canada. So it's these important discussions concerning care.
Okay. What about estate planning?
Yeah, it's, a big one. Estate planning, obviously, wills is part of that. Even healthcare directives and DNR, these should be discussed as a family. And I would also, on the financial side, the importance of a financial advisor as we age becomes even more important. I was just talking to a financial advisor, and they were talking to one of their clients, and they were leaving their RSPs to their kids. And that's what it was in the will. The will said the estate goes to the kids. But there was a lot of money in these RSPs, and not realizing by that one little line, the kids are going to get taxed. 50%, let's say, if it's a decent amount of money. Whereas if you leave the RSPs to a partner, your spouse, then you're not going to get taxed. And so the financial advisor plays a very important role. You could even discuss insurance options, whether it's life or critical illness or long-term care insurance. And then I would also add, in terms of estate planning, we're seeing a trend on early inheritances and discussions about succession. Housing, for example, is becoming very, very expensive, and we're getting more and more examples of parents helping out their kids with an early inheritance so they can get a chance at buying a house because it has become so expensive. So we're seeing a big trend in that as well. And no, Mom and Dad, I'm not pitching for an earlier inheritance, but we are seeing that trend for sure.
Okay, last but not least, I'm sure the list is exhaustive, but I also understand that there might even be some important conversations around siblings.
Yeah, again, when we're talking about not just home care, but we always assume, I have yet to meet a family, 3-4 kids, and everyone's on the same page.
Fair.
So, the siblings have to try to do their best to get along, to try to find a common ground, understand that not everyone's going to be seeing eye to eye. And we see this a lot, Corey, you probably as well. So it's try to have some civilized conversations. It's always in the best interest of mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, but try to get on the same page and try to understand the needs. Usually there's one go-to caregiver of all the siblings. And this is a key person. And I hear a lot of those caregivers. And you know what? My brother just doesn't understand, or my sister just doesn't understand. Try to be understanding. Try to be empathetic, and try to find some solutions for the family that make sense. Most importantly, communicate it. Have those discussions. This is why we're talking about it. Have these discussions in advance before it's crisis mode.
I love that idea, and I want to talk about this more. We have to go to a traffic break, but here's my question. I want you to challenge you when we return. What about those families where their parents just aren't comfortable about talking about these things? What's something that we can do to get the conversation started? Welcome back. You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corey Sirota, along with my co-host Matt Delvecchio, and we are talking about some important family conversations as we age and why the holidays actually might be a good time to have these discussions. So I'm actually interviewing Matt Delvecchio, a senior transition specialist, and I have a scenario for you, Matt. For so many of us, our parents just aren't comfortable talking about these things. So how would you suggest we start these conversations?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just as we're talking, a text came in, Corey, and listening to this segment, if anything happens to my dad, I have no idea who or where to turn to. He refuses to have a conversation about this crucial topic. It's something we hear very, very often. If we had to pick one thing, what I would suggest is be on the lookout for a trigger event. We call them trigger events. And a trigger event, for example, could be maybe a friend or another family member. Something's happened to them. Maybe there's a care need. Maybe they've moved out. Maybe they had a financial situation. Maybe there was a death in their family. That's all trigger events. So you're not putting mom or dad on the spot to talk about, but hey, Jane down the corner or cousin Sue, something happened. So always look for that. Another one might be, God forbid, someone had to be hospitalized, mom or dad. Maybe there was a slip or a fall, or there was a health reason. They're in the hospital. That's a trigger event. Some of them are serious. Some of them are minor, but they're all considered a trigger event. Say, oh boy, what if that were to happen again? There was a slip, or the oven was left on. These are trigger events that we could talk about. And even when you're watching TV or a radio show just like this is also a way to begin lightly a conversation that should be had with the family.
So you're saying a trigger event like someone else, happening to someone else in the family, seeing it on TV, or hey, I listened to this radio show today and they were talking about this. What do you think? Is that what you're suggesting?
Exactly. Use that as a door opener to at least begin a conversation.
Makes perfect sense. That's Matt Delvecchio, Senior Transition Specialist, talking to me, Corey Sirota, on Life Unrehearsed, which is, all of this is Life Unrehearsed issues. Matt, why is it important to be so proactive?
We always want to avoid crisis mode if we can. And why not use the holidays to bring up some of these discussions? And we go back to the wills even. It's amazing, right? 45-50% of Canadians not having wills. We've worked so hard to build our assets. Many people came from nothing, and you've built a lifetime of assets. But we tend to avoid these tough conversations. And do we really want the government meddling in our own affairs and deciding who's going to get what? So it is very important to be proactive. And I'll give on the health side an example. And I see it very often with adult children where the kids, the siblings are arguing amongst themselves with one of their parents. And I'm going to give a scenario that I see. We hear a lot in the media and ourselves, about financial abuse and elder abuse. And there is that. We've both seen it. However, more often than not, I would say a lot more often than not, it's the opposite. And I'm going to give you an example of a situation where we've got the children saying, Ma, Dad, you've built a lifetime of assets. You have some money. Spend it on yourselves. Okay, it would be nice to get an inheritance, but focus on yourself. And the challenge is with that generation, they are a generation of savers, not spenders. And they want to leave whatever legacy and inheritance for the children. So sometimes we get in situations where the kids are arguing with mom and dad. Spend it on yourself. Get some extra home care. Maybe find a nice residence. Get the proper care. And they don't, even to their detriment, now that their health and safety might be in peril here. So it's one of these tough conversations. So be proactive and let your parents know it's okay to spend money on yourself.
I think it's very important. I think you're right. It is a psychological shift that is not easy for a certain generation and a certain different cultural backgrounds. But why should they lose it? Okay, so here we are. Perhaps you can give us some ideas about how to start these conversations. Yeah,
and I would just also add, here's during the holidays. The family is getting together, probably a little bit more together than we were last year. And let's use that opportunity. I would even say for the children, and particularly the adult children that are living out of town, and they're coming in to see mom or dad or grandparents or what have you, they will actually have a little bit of a better perspective than the son or the daughter that sees mom or dad every single day. So someone that might not see your parent for a few months, 6 months, even now we've had cases of 2 years, they will clearly see if there's been any changes, whether it's cognitively, physically, and that's important. Use the holidays for that, to recognize that, because you know what, the pandemic has taken a toll on many people. We've talked about this often, right, Corey, on the mental health and physical health of people. So besides these trigger events, what we'd also like to do is, how do we talk about these conversations? That texter that just came in, my dad doesn't want to talk about it.
Right.
You know, what resonates, I find, is when we're talking about this elder abuse and fraud, you know, these are identity theft. These are things that worry everyone, particularly seniors. That's one way to start a conversation, because we're worried about, you know, anyone having to deal with that. Even get into things like, social media is becoming important, and even passwords. What happens if you're incapacitated? What happens if something happens to you? I don't have your passwords, which could lead to further conversations. You know what? I don't even know if you have a notary. Do you have a notary or an accountant or financial advisor? Little conversations, building it up, try to get those contact people. And then ultimately it's going to lead. What if something were to happen to you? We love you. We're worried, but what if something were to happen to you? What would you want? What type of care would you need?
That's the voice of Matt Del Vecchio, Senior Transition Specialist, and he is co-host of Life Unrehearsed. And we're talking about really important family conversations, particularly with your aging parent. I know there's a privacy issue, like a privacy factor that maybe makes it, would you say it's fair to say that that's what makes it uncomfortable for parents are supposed to play this certain role and not look vulnerable? So that might be where the resistance about having the conversations is as well? Yeah,
I'm not so sure if it's a privacy, but it's more a psychological, in the fact that none of your business. You know what? I'm not comfortable talking about it, and as a result, it makes it a little tougher on the kids. So that's why we go back to the trigger events. Try to get those trigger events to begin a conversation, because I've seen, let's face it, there are stubborn people all around the world, and it's just like, no, I'm not talking about it. And there are others, little gaps, little holes, little things that happen to at least to begin that dialogue with your family members.
Well, I have to thank you, Matt, so much. Let me remind our listeners that that's Matt Del Vecchio. He is a certified professional consultant on aging and the founder and president of Lianas Senior Transition Support. Matt, how can people reach you?
Well, thanks, Corey. Probably the best way is just to look up on the website. It's lianasservices.com, and Lianas is spelled Lianas. Some people ask me, where'd you get the name from? Well, it's an acronym of our children's name, Lisa, Anthony, and Axel. So lianasservices.com.
Thank you so much, Matt. And now I will let you know that next week on Life Unrehearsed, we'll be having a specialist on the topic of menopause, what to expect and how to manage it. Partners may want to listen to this as well. And we'll also be highlighting the latest trends in senior living, everything from retirement communities to how to navigate the healthcare system from placement in a public long-term care home.